Craig Allen is president of the U.S. China Business Council. He has spent much of his career in Asia, including time as U.S. ambassador to Brunei and in various U.S. Department of Commerce postings, including the International Trade Commission's Deputy Assistant Secretary for China. With the U.S. and China engaged in trade disputes, technological competition, and ongoing mistrust of each other's intentions, his views as an experienced insider from America with strong knowledge of China offer an insightful look into our current situation. I was very pleased that Mr. Allen was able to join me for a conversation in Washington during my recent trip to the United States. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to our discussion here. Craig, you know, I happened to read this newspaper. There is one front page article, and I happened to see your quote. It's about businesses seeing U.S.-China strains lingering. What did you say in this article?
The economic relationship between our two countries is very large. It is vast and very complicated. That particular article is about Chinese investment in the United States. I regret to note that Chinese investment in America has fallen off 80% last year. And in my view, that is extremely unfortunate. There are many American workers, there are many American mayors and governors who would welcome Chinese investment. And I would hope that in the future we will find a way to get back to a more normal trading relationship where Chinese investors are going to feel welcome and will expand their investments in the United States, creating jobs and opportunities for my fellow Americans.
Craig, can you get your voice heard in the White House?
Today, there are approximately 2.3 million Americans whose jobs depend on U.S.-China trade and investment. And let me break that down. There are approximately 1 million who work in export-related industries, be it farmers or insurance or retail or whatever. There are approximately 1 million who are distributing Chinese imports, and about 300,000 who are working in Chinese-owned or affiliated companies. So 2.3 million workers are a lot of workers. This economic relationship is very important, and both governments should be working hard to nurture this, because I would argue that we are at an inflection point now, and it could either get much worse or it could get much better, and I hope it gets much better.
We appreciate your constructive points of view about the future of having a healthy development of the business cooperation in concerning trade and investment. What about the excuse of national security, which is often cited by President Trump to bar foreign investment, and particularly the Chinese investors?
So once a foreign company is invested and licensed and registered and operating in the United States, they are treated exactly the same as an American company. However, the authority to make that investment, so the initial decision, the approval of the investment is required. And the same is absolutely true in Chinese law as well. So let us not confuse the approval to make an investment and then how the investment operates afterwards. Now, I'm going to agree with you, however, that excessive talk about national security is confusing to many foreign companies. And policies that excessively restrict foreign competition on the grounds of national security should be looked at carefully.
Let's look at what happened in early March. The National People's Congress, our top legislature, enacted the foreign investment law. that means local authorities in China should not abusively use some of the articles to suit their local conditions and to attract foreign investment, including perhaps coercive transfer of overseas intellectual property rights and so on and so forth. What do you think of the positive impact of this law? I've interviewed many people, Chinese and American alike, about this law, and some Americans still show their concerns about the so-called devil exists in the details.
Correct. Yes.
What does that mean?
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, let me explain. Directionally, the law is great. It is headed in the right direction. But the details are not available so that companies can determine what should they do next. So in a very practical manner, the foreign companies that are in China who operate under that law are not able to determine are they allowed to change their joint venture partnerships? Are they required to change their joint venture partnerships? How will this law affect them in detail is unknowable right now because the details are not available. Not because it's bad, but because the implementing regulations are extremely important. And without those regulations, we don't know really what the law means at the microeconomic level. So the direction is in the right direction, but the lack of detail precludes us from saying specifically, is this helpful or is it not helpful? It seems helpful, but it is not clear that it is helpful. Let me add one additional point. There are not so many countries in the world that have a foreign investment law. America does not have one. So when Chinese companies invest in America, they are treated exactly the same as an American company. And I think that this is an ideal that I would hope that China will aspire to.
You know, this year witnesses the 40th anniversary of U.S. China relationship. It was normalized during the Carter administration. Despite the unilateral moves by the Trump administration and the mounting tensions, what could be done to avert the worst case scenario?
Right. So I think that U.S.-China relationships are at a low point. I think we mutually recognize that. I think that we need to take confidence-building measures to try to improve trust and improve the environment. And I would look in any sphere to be able to do that. I am hopeful that our two presidents, with their wisdom, will be able to reach a trade agreement in the near future. My hope is that they will be in Osaka, Japan, at the same time at the end of June, and I would love I would be extremely happy if the two presidents were able to sign an agreement ending the trade war. That would be a vote of confidence that could set a new plateau, a floor under the relationship, so that we can deal with our other, shall we say, more serious issues. The trade issues are important, but we have many issues, and my fear is that unless we resolve the trade issues, we are going to have a much more difficult time to resolve the other issues. So let's start with the practical
a good
issues.
beginning is half the battle.
That's right.
We got to have a good beginning to minimize the negative impact of chronic trust, chronic issue of mistrust.
That's right.
Many argue, Craig, that instead of simply going back to the Cold War, politicians or people with a vision on both sides should rather employ an approach of constructive realism in shaping the future that not only the United States, China, but also Europeans, Japanese, and other major emerging markets share. Your thoughts on what we call the constructive realism?
I like the idea of constructive realism or smart competition, I think is another way to say the same thing. And what I think that means is that both sides adhere to common rules of the road, and that we both try to become better and allow the other, and indeed welcome the other becoming better within a common global construct. I would note that, in fact, that paradigm is not so difficult to reach. It exists within the contours of the World Trade Organization and the commitments that both sides have taken. And effectively and faithfully implementing our mutual commitments under the WTO would be a great start for us to build trust together. We have both committed to it. Why should we not both implement our commitments? China is on the verge of a new era of innovation, a new era of science, a new era of contributions to the world. And I'm hopeful that we could work together so that the best of both countries is highlighted rather than the worst of both countries. But I think that either of those scenarios is possible, and I will vote and work so that we are able to maximize our cooperation and our smart, fair, and equal competition between the two countries.
Is it possible that after inking this agreement in the trade talk, the two sides may go together in the same direction to rediscover each other? I mean, China may not be yet another evil empire. China certainly does not agree that we should be viewed as an evil empire like Ronald Reagan said about the Soviet Union. And we want to, and we have reasons to show gratitude to what the United States has done to us since 40 years ago. Without your policy of engagement over the past 4 decades, China would not have been what it is today. So we should be grateful, but at the same time, is it important for the U.S. and its people to rediscover the intent and the vision of both the people and the government in China?
I think that both governments should make more efforts at looking at the other side. And it's a little bit like a matter of psychology, that one side is taking steps that creates anxiety in the other, which takes a counter step which creates anxiety in the other. And rather than dancing, we're creating more anxiety in each other right now. And I would prefer to dance. But that takes a sensitivity on both sides. So is it possible for us to reach a plateau, another higher level, as we did in 1979 or in 1999 after the WTO? I do believe it is possible, but it will take steps required in Beijing as well as in Washington for us to reach that plateau. I would not understate the challenges either. In 1979, we had the luxury of having a common adversary. And today, we do not have that luxury. But I would note that we have plenty of common adversaries that are perhaps, over the longer term, yet more dangerous than what we faced together in 1979. Certainly, climate change is an enormous challenge for both countries. Controlling disease, pandemic, that could spread around the world very quickly is a challenge that we should embrace together. Nuclear proliferation, migration. There are a good number. And I am hopeful that we can begin constructive dialogues yet again on those issues. We have only one world, and China and the United States bear unique responsibilities to our people, to each other, and to the world to get this right. Today, I would say we're not doing a great job at that, and both governments should reflect on that reality.
You know, Chinese people feel glad to be viewed as a major responsible stakeholder, like what Robert Zoellick said before.
Yes.
The issue is whether we will be given the chance by President Trump. Craig, international trade is one part of globalization. Now, how do you look at the relationship between the two, international trade and globalization?
It's hard to be concise on that question.
You need to be philosophical.
Okay. So I would say globalization has four components. One is international trade. One is international investment. The third is migration. And the fourth is data. And trade is perhaps not the oldest, but the second oldest part of those four series. And it is incredibly important. But what makes trade so important is not the trade in and of itself, but trade that is commingled with productivity increases, foreign direct investment, and data. And that combination of trade, foreign direct investment, and data is enough to change people's livelihoods on a wholesale manner, for good or for ill. And what we need to be careful of are those fellow Americans and fellow Chinese who have been harmed by the volatility created by trade, be it globalization, be it trade, investment, migration flows, or data flows.
Reform of the WTO needs to be discussed seriously.
Yes.
However, it seems President Trump is more interested in pulling out of WTO.
Well, I would note that the United States is a profoundly democratic country, and President Trump was duly elected by the people of the United States in a reaction to what many people feel as excessive globalization or excessive reliance on international institutions. And so I think that you quite rightly and accurately point out that there is a reaction to that thought, and that that reaction sometimes takes on an element of anti-elite and anti-foreigner, and I regret that. I think that the place for the international organizations which our fathers and our grandfathers contributed to enormously must remain sacrosanct and must remain an important part of the global architecture. So I will share your concern about global and regional architecture. I think that these institutions need to be not only protected and defended, but as you suggest, they do need reform. Let us take one look at the WTO, for example. It was created before the digital age. And in the digital age, data and services are the great bulk of trade, not products flowing on ocean liners back and forth. But the WTO insufficiently regulates those. So I do agree with you entirely that the U.S. and China should be working together with other countries, of course, to strengthen and improve global governance. The world is a small place, And there are an awful lot of problems, be it climate change, be it terrorism, be it migration, be it narcotics, or heaven forbid, global pandemic. But those are real realities, and we should be working together to address them.
Thank you so much, Craig, for your time and views.
It is my honor. Thank you very much. Thank you
so much.
Still to come on Dialogue, Young Ray will be joined by James Backus, Director of the Center for Global Economic and Environmental Opportunity, University of Central Florida.
Well, overwhelmingly, the most important principle underlying the WTO is the principle of multilateralism. It's global cooperation on globally agreed rules. The current President of the United States believes in an old-fashioned rule of power and not in the rule of law.
Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. James Backus. The issue of immediate and great urgency for the Chinese who watch this program would of course be the future of the WTO, and to my knowledge you are one of the top judges on the Appellate organization. So tell us more about whether WTO will survive the current crisis, which is looming larger and larger due to the opposition from the Trump administration.
I'm one of those people, Ray, who believes we have a duty of optimism. And so I remain optimistic. I think the WTO will not only survive, but ultimately it will continue to flourish and flourish all the more. But we're certainly at a rough turning point now. We're largely in trouble because of the intransigence of the Trump administration as it relates to the WTO. The current President of the United States believes in an old-fashioned rule of power and not in the rule of law. And we're seeing that especially in the way that he has been treating my successors on the appellate body of the WTO, the court of last appeal in WTO dispute settlement. He's been trying to intimidate these judges. He has failed in doing so. But the approach he's taken has been to refuse to join in a consensus of all WTO members to appoint new members to the appellate body when the terms of the current judges end. So instead of having the full complement of 7 judges, we're now down to 3 judges, and by year end we'll be down to just 1 judge. The very brilliant woman from China who serves on the appellate body. And it takes 3 judges to be able to hear an appeal in the WTO. So without 3 judges, at least, the WTO dispute settlement system will grind to a halt.
Let's look at the roadmap of reforming the WTO. We have a broad spectrum of diversified opinions concerning the reform of WTO. We have swing votes, important ones like the European Union, Canada, Japan. These member states of WTO sometimes take sides with the United States, sometimes they want to protect the principle of multilateralism. I wonder who will cast the decisive votes in shaping the future of the WTO?
Well, overwhelmingly, the most important principle underlying the WTO is the principle of multilateralism. It's global cooperation on globally agreed rules, and furthermore, the construction and maintenance of an independent, impartial settlement system for resolving disputes. China's been very vocal in supporting all those things. Other countries have been as well, especially developing countries have spoken up lately for multilateralism because they understand that if we have the rule of power instead of the rule of law, then the smaller and less developed countries will suffer in their commercial relations. I think it's important that all members of the WTO transcend whatever their commercial interest may be to continue to support the preservation of the system as a whole, the rule-based world trading system. And I believe that virtually all WTO members are committed to doing that. The transgressor here is primarily my own country, and this is an aberration for the United States. On a bipartisan basis, for more than 70 years, the United States has helped lead the world toward the creation and strengthening of a global rule-based trading system. And there are many Americans who believe that it's very important that we continue with that policy. I'm certainly one of them.
Having said this, let's look at your book. The Willing World, Shaping and Sharing a Sustainable Global Prosperity. It's voted by FT as one of the best sellers. So let me know quickly, what do you talk about in the book?
A global sustainable development will not be achieved unless we have much more multilateralism. My view is that in all of our international institutions, we need to begin to see and treat the economy and the environment as one. The overwhelming issue we face in the world as a species, as one humanity, is that of addressing climate change with all its consequences. We won't be able to do that if we immerse ourselves in all of these sideshows of nationalism and protectionism and pseudo-isolationism. What we need is for companies to come together and work together to achieve global solutions. On climate change, we're not going to resolve the issue unless and until the United States and China work together, period. Right now we're not doing that to the extent we should, primarily because the president of my country denies that there is such a thing as climate change. In fact, he said it's a Chinese hoax. This would be a surprise to tens of thousands of climate scientists all over the world. China is trying to address the issue of climate change as best it can, while also providing economic growth for its growing numbers of people. But in the absence of our cooperation multilaterally, and especially through the leadership of our two countries working side by side in a multilateral context, we're not going to resolve that issue.
James, I'm glad you put your finger on the important issue of leadership. The United States accused China of trying to discredit its democracy and trying to disrupt the existing world order. The issue is, it's not just the Chinese or Europeans who say we support the U.S. world leadership, we support the existing world order, but on condition that you do not put America first unconditionally. So Europeans also are worried about the things and issues that may undermine the American leadership. What are the necessary preconditions to ensure that the United States will continue to assume world leadership? Very quickly, before we wrap up this interesting discussion.
I think the first necessary precondition is for the American people not to re-elect Donald Trump. It's very important to understand that many of the U.S. positions now are simply Trump's positions. He was elected president under our rules for electing president, but 54% of the American people did not vote for him. I'm not alone in looking at the world differently.
We know that the United States is seriously divided, and sometimes we have been left puzzled as to which side represents the true America or American dream. Thank you for your efforts to clarify some of the ambiguity. And I enjoy the intellectual conversation with you, someone who is so authoritative of the WTO. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ray. My pleasure. Anytime.